Is about to blow your mind. Chip Roy, everybody.
Well, good evening, Orlando. How are y'all doing? Sounds like you're doing pretty well. You know, I always tell my staff, I said, never make me follow really good speakers. Again, they put me in right after Tulsi. And I'm like, come on. But you know, I'm honored to be here. It's been tough. Last few years, I've wanted to come and speak at YAL, and we've always had something conflicting with it back up in DC. But I was able to get down this time, and it's great to do it. You know, I think that we should start in the immortal words of Ron Swanson. That history began July 4th, 1776, and everything before that was a mistake. Or for example, capitalism is the only way. It makes America great, England okay, and France terrible. Or the whole point of this country is if you want to eat garbage, balloon to 600 pounds, die of a heart attack at 43, you can. You're free to do so. Or infamously, when he taught the young girl that why government matters, and the answer? It doesn't. Apparently, there's a few Ron Swanson fans here. You guys are here because you love liberty. But what does that mean? Tulsi gave a definition. Most of us would acknowledge, similarly to what she said, that it certainly means being able to exercise our God-given inalienable rights, provided they don't intrude upon the ability of others to exercise those rights. And I'm confident most of us would agree it means keeping government the hell out of our lives. But I want to suggest to you guys a slightly different twist, and that's the notion of independence. And not independence from Britain, famously declared in the Declaration, but independence as free men. We must choose independence over dependence, the kind of grit that led our forefathers into the desolate wilderness, as the Wall Street Journal editorializes every year on Thanksgiving week. They went out in the desolate wilderness to chart a path. My great-great-grandparents moved out to Texas, into Comanche country, and lived in the middle of the hill country in the 1870s. My great-great-grandfather was a Texas Ranger. There was no Walmart to go grab a box fan or an air conditioning unit. You didn't go down the street to go buy a big gulp. I mean, you had to figure out how to live. And you weren't looking at government to figure out how to provide for you. Now, I've been binge watching a lot of the show Yellowstone recently. And many of you know it. You've watched it. Those you don't, the concept's simple. You've got a rancher, John Dutton. He wants to keep his Montana ranch just north of Yellowstone. Very, very far north Texas. But it's getting really hard for him because taxes and paper-pushing private equity firms are trying to take his ranch. Now, he could make tens of millions of dollars if he sold it, but he refuses, right? My point is that it's real. What do you have today that is as real as a piece of God's earth, the life skills to till it, ranch it, to break a horse, to raise and sell cattle, to live off the land, to work with your hands, all without the worry that government will just come and take it through eminent domain or through taxation? The whole point here is to live independently. And in this world in which we go down the road to our little suburban, lives, you can get anything you want in the world, which is a blessing of capitalism and freedom, I acknowledge. I want to remind us that we are increasingly no longer living independently, but rather dependently, and too often dependently on government. In that show, John Dutton says in one show, no one has a right. No one has a right. He posited you have to take a right or stop it from being taken from you. I think there's something to that. We all enjoy these unalienable rights that God gives us, but history has borne out that they do try to take them from us. And they're doing that right now. 60 years ago, President Reagan gave his famous time for choosing speech in October of 1964 when Barry Goldwater was running against LBJ. Now, it wasn't just a choice between Goldwater and LBJ. It was about whether we would choose to defend our life as Americans. It was a choice of whether we would live free as opposed to living under the welfare state that was the clear signs of the Great Society in 1964. Would we choose the siren song of welfare and government-funded programs that surely bind us with the chains of servitude? We talk a big game about freedom. We get mad about the FBI, and we get mad about the tyranny of the state and FISA and all the things that I know would fire you up, that I could sit here and just light the fire. But the reason those bureaucrats can do that to you is because we're wards of the state. We have been walking around with our hands out in Medicare and Social Security. We've been walking out with our hands out for child tax credit. We walk around with our hands out for COVID bailouts. We walk around with our hands out right here in Florida for disaster relief every year. And as a result, you have $35 trillion of debt hung around your necks. You have a dollar getting destroyed. And you have a complete and utter loss of freedom because the generation before yours, maybe the two generations before yours, sold away your birthright for the easy path. That's what happened. The national debt in 1964 was $311 billion. That's about $2.5 trillion adjusted for inflation. $2.5 trillion versus $35 trillion. Reagan was talking about $17 million a day in deficit spending. It's about $10 billion per day now. And I agree with you on foreign aid, totally. But it wouldn't dent, and I'm for it, but it wouldn't dent what I'm talking about. It would help, and we should do it. In 1964, the average home cost was $18,900. That's $192,000 adjusted for inflation. The median house today is $400,000 and almost $30,000. Most of you are out there wondering whether you can achieve the American dream or whether you can own a house. Why? Because the Washington, D.C. is robbing you, young Americans, of that birthright. You are not free because you went to government schools where they've been trying to brainwash you with anti-American, anti-Western civilization ideas since the moment you walked through the doors. And you are also denied the right to get that education by tyranny through COVID lockdowns and distance learning and all the things we saw unfold through the power of government. In 1980, the price to attend a four-year college was $10,000, adjusted for inflation. Today, it's almost $30,000. We spent $116 billion in 1977 for education, $311 billion today, all adjusted for inflation. All to fund the bureaucrats that are funding diversity officers and administrators who are shutting down the schools and trying to indicate how much white people are evil or how men can get pregnant. Look, the bottom line is you're not free if we live in an economy where the Federal Reserve manipulates American wealth behind closed doors. So I will give a shout out, and I want everybody to pray for our dear friend Thomas Massie. Many of you are probably aware he lost his wonderful wife, who I got to know just less than a month ago, and he's back in Kentucky now. And I'm a proud co-sponsor of his bill to end the Fed, to get rid of I'm a proud co-sponsor of his bill to get rid of the Department of Education. I'm a proud co-sponsor of his bill. I'll go down the list of co-sponsorships to Thomas, but we'll just sit here all night because he's one of my best friends in Congress. But you're not free when the Fed is printing money. You're not free when that same government that you're propping up with printed money can spy on you without a warrant via FISA. You're not free if the FBI can target you simply for going to a school board meeting like Scott Smith did in Loudoun County, Virginia. You're not free. You're also not free, and this one's on the edge for my libertarian brothers and sisters, You're also not free if you're being killed by terrorists led into our country because we refuse to secure the border of the United States. And look, I want to be very clear about the state of open borders. Laken Riley, Rachel Marin, Kayla Hamilton, Jocelyn Nungaray, Lizbeth Medina, they're all no longer with us, killed directly as a consequence of people who were led into the United States in direct violation of our laws. And we know we're letting criminals in, we know we're letting terrorists in. They should be alive today, but it's purposeful. It's purposeful. Radical progressive Democrats are trying to remake America. That's what they're trying to do. And look, Milton Friedman famously said in the 1970s, I'm all for open borders if you don't have a welfare state. The fact is, the radical progressive Democrats today are actively working to remake America, and the sad thing is that self-described conservatives have chosen to let them succeed for far too long. And in the process, together, they have combined to destroy the American dream. And Reagan's speech was 60 years ago this October. And here's the raw truth. That generation didn't choose the right path. They didn't. He said it's a time for choosing. They chose wrong. They chose the easy path of more government spending, increased regulation, mass importation, cultural appeasement, abandonment of the fundamental responsibility of government to secure the blessings of liberty. And now we're reaping what they sowed. But here's the good news. The good news is you. The good news is that we don't have to choose that path. We don't have to look like it does right now. When Reagan also said that freedom is never more than one generation from being extinct, I believe the reverse of that is also true, because he was correct. Americans are also never more than one generation away from reclaiming freedom, the prosperity it provides, and the national greatness that flows from embracing it. We can live in a place where the quality of a child's education is not determined by their zip codes or the power of union bosses, but by the informed and free choices of his or her parents. We can live in a country where colleges focus on education instead of indoctrination, and where they don't saddle students and taxpayers with mountains of debt in the process. We can live in a world where health care is actually made affordable and you can go to the doctor of your choice and it's not dictated to you by a government bureaucrat or the crony insurance corporations that's been enriched on the back of government cronyism, and where innovation and price transparency and freedom drive down the cost of health care. We can have a country where a high school graduate can learn a simple trade and a young man and woman can marry. Yes, a young man and woman can marry and feed and care for their family and actually put away money for a down payment on a house, all without reliance upon government, all without tax credits, but simply personal responsibility and hard work. We used to call what I just described the American dream. We still can. We can have a country in which you raise a family according to the truths given to us by a loving God and words given us by the author of creation, and not have to worry about getting targeted by a weaponized government for doing so. We can have a job market that serves American citizens and legal workers, and we can have elections that we trust because we demand that only citizens vote in elections in the United States. We can live in a country where our borders are secure, our streets are safe, and we're free from dangerous narcotics like fentanyl pouring into our streets. We can restore peace through strength by having a strong but sparingly used military. And I believe very much, and this is an important point, I believe very much in peace through strength. I believe very much in having a strong, unequaled military so that we can, in fact, be feared as we use that power appropriately and responsibly. But you have to avoid endless, drawn-out conflicts, and you have to stop using our military to go around and police the world. That's not what a great country does. A great country A great country uses that power and that strength to avoid those wars and use that military sparingly to, yes, stop the march of tyranny as our grandfathers and great-grandfathers did when they stormed the beaches at Normandy appropriately. And let's be very clear, after the withdrawal in Afghanistan and all of the great patriots who went over there and bled and fought to fight terrorism, they shouldn't have been there for 20 years. We shouldn't have an endless AUMF. We shouldn't have endless conflict. But those patriots are just as patriotic and just as awesome as those grandfathers that stormed the beach at Normandy. They are. We can return to the simple idea that we are all created equal, but there are no guaranteed outcomes. We should be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. That government doesn't exist to divide us by race, but to unite us by our common interests as Americans in one simple goal, the revival of the American dream. You are going to revive that American dream. You are going to work with the OG Reagan generation from the 1980s that came up under Reagan, Generation X, and we're going to revive that American dream together. We have a duty to do it. Because of all of those, I went out to Arlington National Cemetery and took my daughter out there 2 weeks ago. 400 and something thousand tombstones in Arlington National Cemetery. They fought so we could make this choice. 1964 was a time for choosing. They chose the wrong path. We can choose the right one in 2024. Our country turns 250 years old in less than 2 years. What are we going to do to celebrate this country turning 250 years old? I believe it will require sacrifice. It will require waking up with purpose. It will require turning down the comforts propped up now for too long. You will have to say no. The most powerful and effective weapon for freedom ever devised. Say no to the repeatedly proven false premise that government can provide for you. It cannot. In the very first essay of the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton put it in stark and direct terms. Quote, "It seems to have been preserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. We can fight now for the policies and ideas based on freedom that will make us better off and more prosperous right now. And those are good things, but we have a greater responsibility before us. You cannot be free if your government owns you. You can, must, and choose to reject the chains of welfare and the false promise of statism. Government, as Reagan said, is not the solution, it is the problem. We cannot print, we cannot borrow, we cannot spend our way to true prosperity by promising that government will care for you. For it will be the same government that shuts you down, the same government that will shut you down for a pandemic, for a radical climate agenda, and for false notions of so-called equity, and inclusion. The American dream depends on the achievement of the American spirit unshackled by government. You can only be free if you are willing to struggle, suffer, and live with risk. You are not free if you wish to choose someone else's promise that you will be comfortable. We have less than 2 years until this country turns 250. The Scottish historian Alexander Fraser Tytler is famous for his observation that democracies and republics don't tend to last very long. He said, quote, "The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years. These nations have progressed through this sequence, from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and from dependence back into bondage." If you listen to that warning and you look around at what this country has been doing for the last several decades and what the Washington Uniparty is up to right now, it doesn't sound good, but it doesn't have to be our destiny. The Minutemen at Lexington and Concord looked at the soldiers of the world's most powerful empire and they said no. King George was ignoring our calls to negotiate and compromise, and our forefathers stood up and they signed their death warrants, pledging their lives or fortunes in sacred honor. Our grandfathers stormed the beaches at Normandy. They didn't look at the cliffs and walk away. They didn't get to Bastogne and not sit in those foxholes. They did it for something bigger. They knew, they put it all on the line because they knew that living free and putting that freedom towards a greater purpose was more important than anything they were risking. That spirit, just as much as any document they produced or self-evident truth they articulated, is our inheritance as Americans. Because we as a people are not as free as we should be. We're not as free as we need to be. And we're not as free as we have the right to be. And we as lovers of freedom need to declare, and this is my call right now for each and every one of you. You're here, you're part of YAL, you can carry the mantle. We need to declare our own new independence as we look ahead to 2026 to once again push back on all of the forces of tyranny, including in our own government in Washington, D.C., in the media, in corporate America, who want to destroy that freedom. We have a choice before us right now. That choice, for me, is freedom. Thank you all, and God bless.